Welcome to the Growing Gorillas podcast. I'm Kisa Davison.
And I'm Travis Davison.
And this podcast is all about parenting. The ups, the downs.
The in-betweens.
We have absolutely no idea what we're doing.
But likely neither do you.
So kick back, relax, and enjoy.
Special thank you to the Cleared Hot podcast for use of the studio and Andy Stump for all of his invaluable information.
If you'd like to learn more about Cleared Hot, visit clearedhotpodcast.com.
Let's do this.
Drink Element, LMNT, is our podcast sponsor today. It's a healthy alternative to sugary electrolyte drinks. Every grab-and-go stick pack replaces all the essential electrolytes that you need with no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients or any other junk. I drink Element every day, and so does Travis, to support...
Because it's delicious.
Well, I was going to say, I drink it to support my hydration. I would say my low-carb diet, my fast, my workouts, etc., but none of those things are true. I just drink it because it's good, and I need water in the morning. My favorite flavor is definitely the orange one, and the green one, and the pink one.
Yes, you're saying raspberry, orange, and lime.
Correct.
Which I don't disagree with you on. However, the watermelon is delicious.
And let's not forget, the chili lime is good with tequila, as is the habanero mango, I think. The two spicy ones are really good with tequila. Not recommended in the morning, but still good with tequila.
Well, yeah. And it's kind of like, I guess, counterbalances.
Totally. It's a math equation. It works out somehow.
I don't think Rob Wolf necessarily is going to stand behind that.
I know, but he's not here. So
that's true.
I'm the official on the subject. But listen, here's the cool part. As a member of our Growing Gorillas community, LMNT has a very, very, very cool offer for you. You can let them know that you are interested in trying out a sample pack. All you have to do is cover the cost of shipping so you can get yours.
Which is what, like $5?
I don't know.
I think it's like $5. Anyways.
I just charge things on my credit card. I don't look at it.
Cheap.
So here's the URL. drinklmnt.com/growing-gorillas. Now remember, growing gorillas, you have to spell all the way out, and there's 2 G's right in the middle, so don't screw it up. drinklmnt.com/growing-gorillas.
And in the words of Stella Davison, hydrate or dihydrate.
I feel like Element should adopt that as their new
Well,
tagline.
they just did.
Okay. Okay, today we're talking to Matt and Salome Thornton, two of our nearest and dearest friends. Matt Thornton is the founder and president of SBG, an organization with more than 70 locations across the globe. His instructional series, Aliveness, which premiered more than 20 years ago, set off a firestorm within the martial arts community and helped ignite a revolution in training methods and what we now call MMA. Maybe you've heard of it. A practitioner for more than 30 years, he holds a 5th degree black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. He's also written a book on the topic of violence that is scheduled for publication this year in 2021.
Yep. And he's also my coach. He was my first.
He's my coach too, by the way.
I forgot about that.
I know.
He's my coach from white to black belt.
He's my coach from white to black belt.
He's my coach from white to 3rd degree black belt.
Well, I don't have a degree yet.
All right. Well, there you go. I got you.
Is that all you want to say about Matt? He also is an impeccable fashionista. Just kidding. He's not at all.
Like David Bowie, he's gone through changes. But no, he's also one of the things that he's currently working on that who knows, maybe by the time this podcast airs, he has been authoring a book on violence. And that is due out, I think, any time now. So I'm super excited to see that.
I just said that. It's due for publication this year in 2021.
Okay, I wasn't paying attention to you again.
Weird. Okay, but also joining Matt. And actually, I'm the most excited to hear this conversation with Salome, or to participate in this conversation with Salome. Salome is Matt's wife and also a lifelong practitioner of mindful movement. She started as a dancer back in Iceland and then began practicing yoga at the age of 10. She also did some Olympic weightlifting as a teenager. She's continued her education in various movement methodologies with emphasis on understanding human anatomy. She's been teaching at SBG HQ for over 11 years, where she founded Primate Yoga, a practical practice. She loves to weave together the best aspects of each system to help people connect their mind and body for optimal well-being. She does also hold a blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu. And when she's not being a wiggle worm on and off the mats, she spends her time homeschooling their children, including their deaf son, and nurturing 2 German Shepherds, 2 cats, and hundreds of plants.
One very fat German Shepherd, by the way.
Is he fat?
Oh my gosh. He's the fattest German Shepherd I've ever seen.
Oh, don't fat shame him.
I don't think he's going to be listening to this podcast.
Okay.
I'm actually shaming Matt and Salome to put their dog on a diet.
Together, Matt and Salome have 5 kids, 2 from a previous marriage, and they live in Portland, Oregon.
This is true. And Salome has become one of my close friends, but the interesting thing...
Did you say friends or fans?
Both. She's probably a fan and a friend.
I think so.
She's a Fran.
She's a Fran.
But no, our relationship has been up and down throughout the years. But over the years, I think we've developed a pretty close relationship. And it was really fun sitting down and talking to the both of them.
So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Welcome to the Growing Gorillas podcast.
Nice to be here.
I love that Salome was like, so what are we talking about today?
Gorillas and how to grow them. It's like plants, but you have to feed them real food.
Does it come from the ground?
Gorillas?
The food for the gorillas. And yes, the gorillas.
Ultimately, all food comes from the ground.
Okay.
It's true.
Well, without the earth, we wouldn't have animals.
Correct.
No gorillas, no nothing.
Are you going to...
No, you do the intro.
Okay, so have you listened to any of them yet? No?
I listened to part of one that you guys were doing.
You need to be closer to your microphone.
You can pull the microphone towards you.
There you go. Perfect.
That's really close. Is that supposed to be that
I
close?
want to be about a fist
Are you guys
away.
going to edit out the awkward parts?
No.
No.
We actually use those.
There would be no material if we edited out everything that was awkward or if we used cuss words.
No, so the idea with the podcast was actually Keis's idea, but the thought was there's not a lot of information out there for parents. Did you get a manual when you gave birth to your first child?
No.
No, we didn't either. But we also figured that what would be more helpful to future parents, current parents, would be have guests from all different backgrounds, walks of life, and things like that. And more than anything else, just show them like, oh, okay, I'm not totally a failure, because our opinion is that there's no perfect parent out there. And there's also no perfect manual or guide out there that's available to people as a resource. So by having this podcast, it would be a chance for other parents that are struggling, going through things, to maybe have somebody that they could relate to, experiencing the same thing. And then obviously the ultimate goal would be that they might hear something on the podcast that actually became useful and helped them maybe avoid, a problem that somebody else has already gone through.
Mm-hmm.
Is that pretty close to accurate?
I think that's totally accurate. I mean, ultimately, right, it's a repository of all these different perspectives on parenting. Because it turns out that not only is there no such thing as a perfect parent, but every child is completely different. You thought I was going to say there was no such thing as a perfect child.
They're both true.
They are both true.
When we were at ladies camp,
Sorry, guys. Put my keys in here.
oh, are you going to edit this part out?
Nope.
Nope.
No, we're going to leave it, Michael. Michael's the editor, and he just interrupted the podcast, so we're going to definitely leave that in.
My bad.
When we were at ladies camp, I was talking to one of the ladies from Reno, and she was talking about her parenting, but I liked the term that she said that each child comes with a pair of blank instructions. So
Blank instructions?
Yeah.
The cruelest joke of all.
I know.
Here's your instruction manual and you open it and it's blank.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, and the podcast has a bit of a jiu-jitsu slant, obviously, because mine and Kisa's life is pretty much immersed in jiu-jitsu all the time. Our kids' lives were pretty much immersed in jiu-jitsu. And then...
That's the air conditioning.
Okay. And then obviously the name of the podcast came from the kids program that Kisa and I developed.
Mm-hmm.
So it obviously makes sense to have my coach on the podcast. But then I was telling Kisa, she's like, well, what do you want to talk to him about? And I was like, well, there's so many things, right? You guys obviously have 3 children together,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you also have a blended family, which a lot of people have blended families. And then like us, you also have a child that has special needs.
Mm-hmm.
So right off the bat, I think those are things that could be talked about. And then there's the interesting fact that you're Icelandic, so you don't know what sarcasm is. Or you so
She laughed. She's learned sarcasm.
she's starting
Was
to
that
learn.
sarcasm? Not sure. I could tell it was a joke.
On a side note, the funny part about the fact that when I first met you, you didn't understand sarcasm, and I only speak in sarcasm.
Mm-hmm.
The funny part about that is that your favorite Icelandic, what do we call it, saying is that burnt baby avoids fire.
I
Which
don't know
means
if
it's
my
very
favorite
literal.
one, but it is a very useful one.
It's actually a terrifyingly literal.
Iceland is very literal. Burnt baby avoids the fire is just a terminology about if you coddle your children and you don't let them make mistakes or trip and fall or do anything mildly dangerous, they're not going to learn how to avoid those things. And so
It's just very extreme, and so I can only imagine what must be going through your head when years ago I would say something sarcastic or Travis would tease you in some way, and to have that kind of very literal and extreme understanding of the world. I don't even know why you talk to me.
Oh, well, it took a while, but honestly, I had a harder time with the niceties of America than like the sarcasm, because Scandinavians are very blunt, and so it's more so that when people would say something, I would just take it literally, and so I wouldn't understand that they were saying the opposite thing. But then when I first moved here, like, we don't engage in a lot of small talk. We don't talk to the person that works at the store or somebody that's standing next to you in line. Everybody just kind of does their own thing. And so we're kind of cold in that sense. But when you come into the family unit, it's very like touchy-feely and close. And when I was remember when I took Liam there, which is Matt's son from his previous marriage, along with Annika, and I was pregnant with Una, and we were in my grandma's apartment, and Liam and I had always had it was started off as a rocky relationship, but it progressed and became now a very like close relationship. But I remember being there, and he was observing how I was interacting with my family and how we were all kind of hanging on each other and hugging each other and just very kind of touchy-feely. And then all of a sudden he kind of walks over and like starts hanging on me and like being snuggly with me. And it was kind of like this is weird, because that's not how we would otherwise usually interact. But, I guess I'm used to that way. Sometimes people find it weird when they first get to know me, that they don't understand that my like proximity and affection is just like general affection.
Sounds a lot like Matt.
Yeah.
Peas in a pod.
Mm-hmm.
Very touchy-feely.
Mm-hmm. First time we met, we were at he was teaching jiu-jitsu in Iceland. And I remember my partner at the time was we were learning how to do triangles. And every time I tried to lock on the triangle, he would like lift me up and body slam me back down. And so at the Q&A, I was like, so what do I do when he does this? And Matt like pointedly looked at him and went, "That's a jerk move." And then he looked at me and told me how to fix the problem. But I remember being kind of stunned at his chivalry there, because that's not necessarily as big of a part of our culture. We're very matriarchal, meaning that men and women kind of work the same. They work the same within the home. They both get maternity or paternity leaves. People don't necessarily tend to get married before they have children, so you have a lot of like single parent families or kids that are raised in two homes back and forth. There's good things that come from like a matriarchal society in the sense that the women are strong and determined and know what they want and they don't put up with any nonsense. But there's also the flip side of it where you lose a lot of kind of family values where it comes to, you know, being able to stay home with your kids, being together as a family, as opposed to this is my life and that's his life, and we share this here little entanglement between the two of us.
Entanglement, otherwise known as children.
Yes. And so it took a little adjusting, but I appreciate his old-fashioned nature, so long as it's not too encroaching. But then,
well, he is old.
as we can tell by his many breaks.
I don't know about the fashioned part of.
Yeah. Fashion. He does have fashion. It's maybe
Just bad fashion?
Yeah.
He's gotten better.
He has gotten better.
It used to be a tie-dye top with camo pants and socks inside of flip-flops. So it's
Before that, it was pajama bottoms.
inside-out hoodies, too.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big thing.
There's some things more important than dressing the way society wants you to dress, right, Matt?
Comfort. Comfort was at the top of my list. So
Yeah, his fashion sense wasn't what drew me to him. It was his intellect, his mind. The first time I tried to talk to him, he just stared at me blankly. And so when people come up to me, they're like, "I don't know if he likes me." He's like, I'm just like, yeah.
That's just how he is.
That's just how he is. First time we spoke, he did this. Until I was like, okay, well, I'll just go somewhere else.
So let me move that microphone closer.
you can pull it. There you go.
There we go. You can talk over
okay.
it, so you can drop it down a little bit and talk over it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not that far. Okay, there we go.
More?
There we go. Perfect. I just had to make it a little bit more awkward.
Matt's also only the second grandparent we've had on the show.
That's true. Wait, who's the first grandparent?
My Nana.
Well, Nana. Have we had any other grandparents on the show?
I don't believe so.
I don't think so either. Good old Grandpa Matt. So,
Yeah.
Travis touched on that blended family, and I don't know if we've had any other blended family parents on the show either.
Well, I mean, the Boysus, but that's different.
That's a very complicated blended family. But Salome, how was that coming into, like, knowing, okay, you started dating Matt and you're like, oh, so there's these other children in your life. And since I've known you, you've always been pretty dead set on, okay, I know what I want, which is to be a mother, which is something we share. Mm-hmm. And now you had this kind of insta family that you came into,
Mm-hmm.
but so much later in their lives, because Liam was 8, 10? Liam was 10?
Yeah, Hunter was 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
How was that?
It had its ups and downs. I mean, when I moved here, you know, Matt and Teresa were still kind of working out their differences and separating, which was a painful process, and it was like painful for everybody involved, including the kids. And so when they first moved in with us, they're, I think, 10 and 11, Hunter and I got along pretty well straight off the bat. And Liam he liked to just kind of give me hell for the first few years, but I won him over slowly but surely with my sort of, I guess, genuine personality. He used to love sarcasm, and so he would just endlessly prod at me and make fun of me, and I'm not witty in that way, so I'm not quick with words to defend myself.
Took your lashings.
Basically, he just took my lashings, and eventually it seems like he just got to a point where he felt sorry for me and cared enough about me that he stopped. But yeah, and my parents, like I said, they were married for a time being, but they got divorced when I was 6. And so I grew up moving back and forth between the two of them, and they had alternate partners and so on. And the hardest part about that was when they weren't friends. And they would, there was time frames where they were friends and they were hanging out with each other's mates. And, I saw that and I appreciated that. But then there was also time frames where they hated each other's guts, and we kind of got stuck in the middle of it. And so I understood why Liam was upset, and I just gave him time, and he kind of came around to his own. He really did not want us to have kids.
Oh, really?
He was so mad that we were going to have kids. And I always remember when we brought Annika home from the hospital, it was actually Hamilton's sister came there because she had a little baby, and so she came over. And so everybody was holding the baby and kind of passing the baby around, except Liam was like, nope, not touching that baby. And she just looked at him like, what do you mean? Took the baby and like forced it in his hands, and he was like, okay. And it still took him a little while to warm up, but Annika basically, of course, adored him. He was her big brother, and she'd follow him all around, and so she won him over. And then I have a picture when we bring Una home from the hospital, and he's a bit older, and he's holding her, and he's got this warm, loving, fuzzy smile. And he really turned out to be a really awesome big brother. He's a great role model. He's very helpful as far as I'm concerned, because he cares about, we have the same values. He cares about them working hard and being honest and doing the right thing, and he's observant, and he keeps a good eye on them. And so he really participates in raising them. And me and Teresa have a pretty good relationship as well. We've become friends, and I just think that's something really worth striving for if you have a blended family, to expand the horizon of the family so that it includes everybody, so all of the children have all of their parents, and there isn't like a tug of war that's straining them all the time.
You said something early on in your description of that history, which is that you were just patient with him. And so I would imagine, here you are, there's a 10-year-old who doesn't exactly have the world.
I think he was 9, but
no, he was 10.
Was he 10?
He was 11.
But who's counting?
He's exactly 10 years younger than me, and I was 20.
Okay.
Let's not make it any more creepy than that. No.
But it sounded like you kind of had that perspective that, okay, he's a 10-year-old boy whose family is now different than it was before, and there's maybe a lack of feeling like there's a security, this is how we did things, and now we're doing things differently. What's next, and who is this woman, and why can't she understand my jokes?
And why is she trying to make me do chores?
But that you had the patience to know that he needed to develop as a child into an adult, but also your relationship needed to develop.
I could tell that he was trying harder not to like me than he actually didn't like me. And so, for example, before we got married, some of my friends came over and we were doing like face masks and nail polish and different things, and he would just kind of hover and like kind of want to be included. And I could see like that even though he didn't want to admit it, it made him happy to have people around and to have family and to have those interactions. And fortunately for me, he was a teenager kind of much like myself, where he had like harsh 2 years between like 12 and 14 where everything was just dark and dreary and miserable all the time.
He was talking about that yesterday, about, how did he describe it? He was at the bottom of the lake. He put himself to the bottom of the lake, and if you wanted to interact with him, you had to be dragged down to the bottom of the lake to interact.
Pleasant.
Yeah.
Like, but at a certain point, he just kind of put the two and two together. Like, it's not making his life any better. It's not really helping anything. And he just put it behind him and moved on. And so that was a relief.
How was that for you? What was your involvement in? You just left town. You're like, I got to go earn some money. I'll be back in a week.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I'm not sure where to even start with that. But yeah, I was still traveling a lot more than I do now, doing a lot of seminars, working, trying to build up the gym. So I wasn't home as much as I'd like to be, but I was still home pretty good percentage of the time. And, you know, teenage boys, they're gonna do what they want to do. And I thought it was important that they have some discipline and level of chores and things that they had to do at the house. And Salome was pretty good about doing it in a way that I thought was fair. So I think she did a good job.
I'm very structure oriented. I like things to be in order, and my biggest frustration in life is having to tell people what to do. And like, why can't they just do it themselves? Because it's the right thing to do, and that's what you're supposed to do. And I don't know, the way that we grew up, everybody always kind of helped out and chipped in. It was, and so it was just kind of an automatic to me that everybody was supposed to participate and help out. And Matt, being a little bit old-fashioned, when we first kind of started our blended family, he was more inclined to feel like the women should be doing the raising of the children.
Let me clarify this.
You're on record.
Let me see how I can phrase this in a way that's not going to get me in trouble. I believe very strongly that if you're going to have kids, the mother shouldn't have to work. So as a general rule, I told myself that when I get married, my wife is never going to have to work, no matter what. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean she can't work. She can do what she wants to do. But I'm going to make enough money to support the family so she doesn't have to. And I think that's very important, because I think kids really need at least one parent all the time. I don't think they should be raised by daycare. And I think when that value is lost, she mentioned Iceland and other places, the outcome is not good for society or anybody else. And I think we're starting to lose that value here. And I don't think people fully realize what's going to happen when you have a generation of boys who become men who don't feel it's their responsibility to take care of their entire family. So if you take that too far, it's like, well, I'm working 50 hours a week or doing whatever I'm doing, so when I come home, I expect certain things to be done, and I'm not going to participate and that kind of stuff, which on my bad days, I'm sure I could be that way. But I do realize it, you know, everybody has a chore to do in the family. But from my perspective, that was my number one responsibility. I still feel that way. I've passed that on to my sons and my kids. I told my brother the same thing. I said, if you get married, you know, you better make sure Hannah never has to work. And she better not ever pick up a check when you're dating either. You know, those kind of things I find embarrassing, but maybe I'm a dinosaur.
No,
I most of what you said I agree with. So
Yeah.
maybe, well, I mean,
What parts did you disagree with?
the part about dinner not being ready when I get home, my newspaper, my lazy boy, pipe, foot
I will
massage.
say that by the time I met him, I had kind of given up on love. I was a big romantic, and I had the storyline in my head from as young as I can remember of this big burly giant that was scary to everybody else that was going to come along one day and whisk me away. And I always knew that I wanted to fall in love and I wanted to have kids. But I had become kind of disillusioned with it, like before we met. And my expectation was fully that I was going to be working some crappy job, you know, 8 hours a day to make ends meet, and I'd be a single mom because I wanted to have kids, and I wasn't really finding anybody that, you know, I was meshing that way with. I never, ever, ever would have expected to be a stay-at-home mom. And if anything, I thought that would be like a failure of meeting my potential. It's like, oh, you know, just stay at home all the time and clean and take care of the kids. Like, what's up with that? But I wouldn't have it any other way. And so I'm really grateful for the fact that I get to spend my time with my kids at home, making a home for us, you know, helping them, educating them. And like, we homeschool our kids.
I think half of our guests so far have homeschooled their kids, by the way.
That
Just a
might
sidebar.
that might have been where we went wrong.
Your kids are pretty good.
Technically, they're all adults as of Saturday.
I know.
You got also, I think, the environment, you know, in which you go. In Iceland, you have a really good school system. So it's not that big of a deal that the kids are kind of raised through the school system because they're getting a good education.
Yeah, sending your kids to school in Kalispell and sending your kids to school in the Portland Public School District is two different things. I'd not let anybody from the Portland Public School District within a mile of my children.
I don't disagree with that either.
I mean, we tried with both of the boys. I mean, Hunter had his own issues kind of not fitting in anywhere, and with Liam, he switched schools a number of times, but no matter whether it was a charter school or the public school, there was always a problem. And like in the public schools, the classrooms were so big that even though he wanted to apply himself, he couldn't get any attention or instruction from the teacher because the teacher was just trying to control the room.
And the instruction wasn't about education anyway. The goal is not educating our kids in the Portland Public School District. The goal is indoctrinating them. That's the name of the game.
It wasn't quite that bad though when.
Well, if you look at the charter school he went to, I'll give you an example.
So that's the other school. When we did the charter school, he got a very limited education.
He had the giant school, which was violent and inept. And then we put him in a small charter school because that would be better.
This is high school.
Yeah, where the only thing he ever learned was ridiculous, horrible propaganda about the United States. And I'd say, well, when are you going to get to the Civil War? When you get to the Revolutionary War? Are we ever going to learn anything besides the atrocities committed against Native Americans? And I even had some conversations with his professors, and I realized two things. One, no, they'll never learn anything about that. And two, he doesn't know anything about it. That this particular guy read Howard Zinn. And his understanding of America ended after he read that book, and he's just going to pass that information on to the kids. And I don't want people who I don't mind people having different politics, but if you're going to go in and become a teacher to educate children, your goal should be to educate children, not make children think what you think.
It's
that would
funny.
be the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just talking to someone recently about Howard Zinn's book because that was, of course, was, I wouldn't say required reading for the rebellious college thinker, but definitely amongst my peers in college, you read that book and it became all about like, oh, wait a second, there's a different way to look at things. There's a different way. But that requires that you grew up with this kind of limited, I won't even call it traditional, but a more limited understanding, a limited version of history. And then Howard Zinn, his book, what is it? People's History of the United States.
History of the United States, yeah.
Opens your mind to there's a possibility that there are other perspectives.
That's good, and that's a good part about it.
But if you only start with
start with that, or if afterwards you check his citations and actually go deeper into the history, in either case you're going to find out it's a bad book.
Right. Period. End paragraph. So, back to the homeschooling.
Yeah.
Yep.
We, when Annika was a kindergartner, we got her into the same charter school that Liam had graduated from.
This is the Howard Zinn Charter School.
Yes, that's where it was great because it was a small school. There was a lot of involvement between kids of different ages. They got to participate in making decisions for the school and so on. But at the same time, Liam would often complain about, like, they'd have these meetings about what they'd want to do at school, and then you'd have like 5-year-olds chiming in about, I want more playtime or more this.
Recess all day.
Yeah. But we sent
popsicles for lunch.
Annika there for about, I want to say, one semester, half a semester, when Una was just newborn baby. And the reason why we pulled her out was, so I was actually teaching yoga there, so I'd be there, once a week teaching yoga at the preschool to the preschool kids. But there was this one girl that she was in class with, and the two of them were kind of, they kind of got at odds, but they were friends, but like not the nice kind of friends. And one day we were going outside and it was cold, and Annika wouldn't put her coat on. And so...
Wait, Annika?
Mm-hmm. And I was like, why won't you put your coat on? She's like, it makes me look fat, because it was a, like, duffel coat. And if you guys know Annika, she's like a
beanpole.
Beanpole, exactly. But also she was 5. And I was like, okay, well, this stuff didn't even occur to me until I was 14 and got into high school and grew boobs over summertime, and some girls were like, oh, she got plastic surgery, or she got fat, and that like led to me dealing with eating disorders and all sorts of other like self confidence issues. And I was looking at my like 5-year-old girl, and I'm like, nope, we're not gonna do that.
You know what I'll say, to people who are thinking about homeschooling, the worst argument against homeschooling, which is usually the first one that's brought up, is, well, kids need socialization. How are they going to get socialization? It's like, no, that's actually the worst possible part of school. Kids don't need to be stuck in rooms with each other, socializing each other about what's normal and what's not. When you have your kid homeschooled, they can learn how to socialize around an environment that you can control. She can learn how to socialize here with you guys. She can learn how to socialize in jiu-jitsu class. There's all kinds of places you can teach her to socialize. You don't need to throw her into Lord of the Flies for 15 years and let them socialize each other, which is essentially what the public school district does at best.
It's like we can control what we allow our kids to be exposed to, but I can't control what her classmates are exposed to. And it's just not something that I really, like, I wanted my kids to know who they were and know what they wanted from life and, you know, have an understanding of themselves before somebody else came in and started telling them, you know, who they were or where their flaws were and this and that. Like, I wanted them to have the maturity to know the difference and be able to recognize those kind of comments and brush them off and, you know.
I think that the argument for having diversity in schools, diversity in education, diversity in curriculum development, diversity in all that also depends on, or rather it relies on the assumption that kids have they've got their feet underneath them. They've got a solid understanding of who they are, who their family is, what they're doing, which is very difficult for a 5-year-old to have, period. Or, you know,
even a 15-year-old.
A 15-year-old or a 10-year-old whose family is changing, or you know, all of that. Or what I know you love to talk about, but the 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old who's got a working mom who was raised in daycare, who doesn't have a real solid understanding of this is our value system, this is this is what we believe in. And then I can start to explore the world and see that different people have different perspectives and be okay with that, rather than feeling attacked by that or threatened, or because when people feel threatened is when we also feel like we have to fight and
become defensive.
Yeah, and I think
conquer.
in a small town like Kalispell, which is a nice town and where you know your neighbors and
our alleys are clean.
Your alleys are clean. There's not homeless junkies on the street. You can leave your snow shovel. I could go on, but you guys probably knew half the parents that were in, you know, Stella's classroom at a given time, right? You knew the teacher, you had that kind of relationship. And so in that kind of,
kids.
Yeah, you knew most of the kids. So in that kind of environment, it's different from once you get into a place like Portland or LA or Seattle.
For sure.
It's just mayhem.
It was actually one of the motivating factors for me, at least, in leaving. You know, we were Portland Metro, we weren't in Portland, but outside in the suburb in Camas, Washington, was that I grew up in a small town, and I like being a big fish in a little pond. Everybody knows everybody. I know, you know, my kids can walk to school, and I don't worry too much about it. But also that I knew moving to Kalispell that there would be more likely that it would be a shared set of values. That because Kalispell is kind of a homogenous community, or was back then.
It's still pretty homogenous.
15 years ago, that there was a better chance that the families that my kids would interact with were more like our families than not.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and there is a...
I know that sounds very...
It sounded
very
fine.
Well, you're talking about
incorrect.
values, and that's the important part to emphasize there.
Right. Not socioeconomics or skin color.
Yeah,
or
you're not talking about immutable characteristics. You're talking about the values that you hold dear as far as the core values of how you want your kids to be raised.
Correct. Which I think have, sorry I interrupted you again, but I'm going to continue.
That's okay.
Which I think have a lot to do with being in a small town.
Oh, 100%.
And that's what I was getting at, is I think that there's a lot that attracts people to the big city. There are things about being in a big city, New York City, LA, like there are things about that people like, or they like the idea of, but the reality is I think that what separates small towns from big cities is the lack of anonymity. Because I'm going to use Portland as an example, right? Like, are people more or less likely to behave badly if their face is exposed or if it's covered in a black stocking mask, right? Well, so in Kalispell, I know every teller at the bank. They know me by name. They know my dog's name, right? Like, I go to a restaurant, they ask about my kids by name. So there's an accountability that comes with that when you realize that, oh, it's a small town. Like if I do something bad, everyone's going to find out about it. Like that's a big deterrent for a lot of people when they make decisions, is whether or not they're going to get caught. And so I think that kind of builds in a safety net. And Matt, you and I were talking about this with John and Alex on his podcast the other day, but I think there's a misconception too amongst certain people when it comes to parenting, that it's not okay for us to like keep our children away from things that are going to hurt them.
Right.
And that's actually our number one job. It's just like a coach at the gym. Like, what do we tell our coaches in the coaches course? Their number one job is safety. Like, that's it. Because if you can't keep the class safe, nothing matters beyond that point. And as a parent, if you have an opportunity to keep your children safe and you choose not to do it because you're like, well, they need to figure it out. It's like, no, they don't.
Which is usually code for you just want to do your own thing.
Correct.
It brings a whole different backstory to Burnt Baby Avoids Fire.
I know, that's what I was thinking.
But the Burnt Baby Avoids Fire is a great segue, actually, because look, it's funny, it's tongue-in-cheek, because all of us as parents, we would never allow our child to walk over to the hot stove or the fireplace and put their hand in it and then be like, well, at least now they know. Right? We would never do that. No good parent is going to do that.
No, we would tell them, don't touch that, it's hot. And we would become very dramatic.
And anytime we were in the room and we saw them get ready to touch something hot, we would run over there and stop them from doing it. And then our hope is that when we're not in that room, and when they are 18 or they're 20 or whenever they decide to move out and become independent of us, that those lessons will stick. But we also know that if they don't and they do touch it, they're going to get burned.
There's the natural consequence.
Correct. And all of us, I think, I for sure am guilty of this. I can think of countless times where my father or an uncle or a grandparent saw me struggling with something in my life and gave me advice. And at the time I was like, yeah, but that's different for me. Like, I appreciate what you're saying, but you don't understand what I'm going through, right? And then sure enough, you look back and you're like, damn it, I should have listened. Like, they were right, right? So they're going to make mistakes. But as parents, it's pretty sloppy and lazy if we see a potential disaster and we just sit back on our hands and are like, okay. Or if we have an opportunity to do something better, like pull our kids out of a bad school or pull our kids out of a bad city. Like, if you have the means and the ability to raise your kids in a better environment and you don't do it because you think you're doing the right thing to expose them to evil.
It's like what I said on that podcast. My simple rules for being a coach and simple rules for being a parent are exactly the same. Your first number one job, no matter what, is to keep your kids safe. If you fail at that, especially if you fail at that because you're off doing something selfish, there's a level of respect that you'll never be able to have from me, ever. Like, you have lost it, or from them. So, I mean, that's number one. Number two is you want to make sure they do better than you did. And give them all the opportunities to do it. And then number three is as parents, we have to keep growing ourselves. As coaches, we have to keep training ourselves so that we can serve as examples. But just like I tell my coaches, 3 is a distant 3. Like, first you have 1 and 2. And when you're primarily a coach or primarily a parent, 1 and 2 are the most important. And then we keep working on 3. We keep working on ourselves. But as soon as you switch that order up and you decide, oh, my life, my dreams, I have to go do this. No, fuck you. You should have figured that out before you had kids.
Yes.
And that's just, I don't see how people don't understand that sometimes.
Yeah, and we talked about that. The coaching analogy is so great with parenting, because it is that. It's safety first, and then it's your students should be better than you. If you're doing your job right, it doesn't make any sense in any other way, then they should be better than you were at blue belt, better than you at purple belt, better than you at brown belt, and they should be beating you at black belt, right? I mean, and remember I was bragging about Ricky when he moved out, because I moved out at 19 and I thought I was doing pretty good. I was like, oh man, I was out of the house by the time I was 19. I moved to a different state. Look at how good I did. And then my son moves out at 18, and 5 hours away. But then there's a certain level of accomplishment that comes with that too. It's like I think I've talked about this several times. For whatever reason, this poker game just really stood out in my mind this year at Christmas, because I've always played poker, and so my kids do too. And Ricky was just adamant. He I don't know why he couldn't stop talking about, Dad, I want to play poker. I want to play poker. Well, he wanted to play poker because he's better than me now. And so the first time I sat down and realized, oh my God, like if I really go head to head with my 19-year-old son now.
Is he counting cards?
Yes, he understands the math as well as I do, and he has more discipline than I do. So even though I know the math, I'll still take a risk. He actually plays it the way you're supposed to, like a robot. Part of that's because he plays online, but still, I don't know. It's really nice. It was like when Gus beat me at the Gorilla Cup. It's a weird thing because people are like, "Oh man, were you embarrassed that you lost to one of your students in front of 500 other students?"
Right.
I was like, actually, no. I was like super stoked. Like I did a good job.
Get to the punchline about the poker game. How much money did Ricky steal from you that night, or win from you?
So the first night I actually beat him, but it was that night when I went to bed, and it took so long, and I was like, man. And then he proceeded over the course of the weekend, I think, to take about $350. So
that was probably the most satisfying $350 he's ever earned.
Oh yeah, he could care less about the money. It was not about the money. And of course he had his roommates with him and stuff too. So it was personal enjoyment for him, but then it also was like a little bit of status. So I beat my dad.
I want to talk a little bit too about Archie and what your experience has been having special needs.
Before we go there, I want to piggyback on the burnt baby avoids the fire dynamic. And the way I've been thinking about it lately is like, yes, we want to keep them safe, but we don't want to shelter them from natural consequences. And I kind of think of it as like a progressive resistance. It's aliveness training as you raise them. And
so good. Yeah.
We have, I had a lot of like issues coming into my adult life where I hadn't had the stability and the structure, and stuff had happened that didn't leave me particularly strong at the time. And so in my natural environment, I would try kind of paranoid to keep my kids in a little box and don't anybody touch them, don't come close to them. He's a lot more, we go to a restaurant, we're sitting and they want to go to the bathroom. My first thought is oh my God, what if somebody else goes into the bathroom and something bad happens? And he's like, no, this is a safe environment. It's good for them to learn how to talk to people. Like we said, we don't teach them stranger danger. We teach them how to talk to strangers. And we have a whole system, which we got from Gavin DeBecker, which is, first you find a mom. If you can't find a mom, you find a nice lady. If you can't find a nice lady, you find a dad. If you can't find a dad, you find somebody in a uniform that works there. And that they're always much, much safer if they initiate the contact than if anybody else initiates the contact with them. Don't teach them when people try and make your kids hug somebody or give them kisses or something, and that kid feels this is I don't want to do that. You don't force that, because then you're teaching them to override their own intuition. So we teach them to trust their intuition and to, listen to it and not be scared of making how they feel be known.
That's actually a lot more involved and wise, mature than when we had our kids at restaurants and they wanted to go to the bathroom. We'd say, okay, well, don't get raped.
That's one of it reminds me of there's many bad quotes people use inappropriately from philosophy, but one of the biggest ones was Nietzsche's, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. No, it doesn't. A lot of times what doesn't kill you just breaks you down and injures you and makes you worse.
Yeah, so one of my biggest goals in life is that my kids reach the point where they want to go off into the world and, leave our little nest, that they have the confidence to tackle whatever comes their way. And that they don't, you don't want to shelter them to the point where, they're scared of everything, but you also don't want to have injury on them that's going to also scare them.
Break them.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that on the burnt baby avoids the fire concept, that there is a sort of progressive resistance strategy to it.
That might have to be the title of this podcast, although I don't know how
I
that's
think
going to...
that will be the title of this one.
I don't know how that's going to fly.
Burnt baby avoids fire.
That'll be a head turner.
That's for sure the title. But no, I think what you're... And again, not to go back to jiu-jitsu analogies and things like that, but I can't help it because that's pretty much, I think in those terms all the time. But that idea of an adaptive resistance or aliveness, it's true, right? But it's just like in jiu-jitsu, like if too much too soon and you squash, there's no progress, right? Lack of any resistance, and there's no impetus for growth. There's no, it's hard to shed bad habits if there's no negative consequence for having a bad habit. So I do think it's a happy medium, and I think that it probably is a gradient that changes with the age of the child, right? Like, obviously, as infants, they're basically, we had this conversation the other night at dinner, right? They're 100% dependent. Like, there's nothing they can do for themselves at that age. And then as they start to get older, there's a little bit more. But even a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, like there's not a lot that you can expect, and there's not a lot that they're capable of. And then as they, 10, 12, and then you have teenagers, and eventually you're preparing them for adulthood, right? Because that is what parenting is, right?
Step by step.
Raising a child into adulthood. So I think that's a good way to think about it. Controlling that pressure.
Easier to build strong children than to repair broken
Men.
adults or men, On Archie, what did you want to know?
Well, I remember when,
Well, first of all, he's deaf.
Yes, he's profoundly deaf. So when he was first born, none of our kids have come into the world very gracefully, in a way. Like, each and every birth was traumatizing in its own way.
little jerks.
For you.
Oh,
For
you weren't
me.
traumatized by any of it?
Well, I mean physically.
He was
right?
traumatized.
I was okay.
It was physically traumatizing
That's like
for me,
childbirth
but
is easy.
Yeah.
All 5 times for me, it was like a piece of cake.
yeah, I remember. So Annika was a emergency C-section, Erna was a VBAC, which is natural birth after a C-section. Her birth was the best, and I credit that to my sister fainting in the delivery room right as the midwife brought out the shears and was going to slice me open. And then I was like, screw that, and pushed her out, and out she came. And I was like, whew. But then that was not the fortune we had with Archie, and our eyes kind of met right as the shiznit hit the fan, and we just both knew, like, oh, it's do or die. Like, there's only one way through, and that's going straight through. Like, you can't, there's no other way around it. But then while we're in the hospital, we were sleeping, and Matt wakes up and there's a man kind of over the crib. And so they'd done a hearing test on him and he'd failed. And they do them now just automatically at the hospital, because one of the problems with deaf children is people don't always realize that they're deaf until the time point where they're supposed to be speaking comes up and they're not developing that way. And oftentimes that's like a 2 or 3 year old kid, depending on, the parents. And so at first they were like, oh, I wouldn't worry about it. It's probably just fluid in the ear canal, which is fairly common after traumatic births. And so that was kind of what we were expecting. And so we weren't too concerned about it, but we took him home from the hospital and we'd do some like tests, like play music or clap by him or try and, see if he'd respond. And there was no response. And then we went in to do like a really thorough test, and they hooked all these wires up to him, and they like basically scanned the brain waves with different sounds, and we got the results that he was profoundly deaf, meaning like he can't hear anything, nothing. And I remember the first thing that went through my mind was, how am I going to teach him how to read? I can't share music with him. How am I going to educate him if I can't teach him how to read? And at the time, I didn't know that there was such a thing as cochlear implants. And like all the worst things flash through your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, would it be better if he hadn't even been born? Like all these like horrible thoughts that you don't, no parent wants to admit that they have, but sometimes stuff is scary. And we kind of grieved it for about 24 hours or so until we accepted the reality. Matt said, you know, are you going to love him any less? Do you think he's going to love you any less? And the answer was obvious, no. And so then there was only one thing to do. It's like you just have to figure out, what does the work involve in order to get him to a point where he can be a successful adult and function on his own one day and have a fulfilling life, you know, reach his full potential, and you just got to suck it up and do the work. And it
seems like part of what makes up the work is the fact that the majority of society doesn't operate with that absence of hearing. And so, you know, I mean, just us sitting at lunch yesterday, I kept turning to Liam and Annika like, hey, how do you say this? How do you say this? You know, trying to just communicate and to connect with him. And you can see where he wants to connect with, you know, he was trying to show the people at the table next to us his dinosaurs. They were like, we're just here to eat pizza. I know.
And I told you the story already, that I think I was pregnant with him. It was before, you know, we knew he was going to be deaf, and I saw a video of this little boy at Disneyland, and there was Minnie and Mickey Mouse, and they like crouched down, got to his level, so they were in you know, his eyesight, and they knew how to sign, and they were signing with him, and the look on his face that they knew his language, that he wasn't isolated from that experience, was I mean, it just had a big effect on me, to the point where I was like, ooh, if I ever learn another language, and I've learned a bunch of languages in my lifetime, I want it to be sign language, because I want to be able to have that effect on some little person one day. And I'm not religious, but Icelanders are known to be very logical, but also very superstitious. And so I kind of feel like the world has a way of bringing around those things for you. And now, you know, as we started to look into what it was going to take to have a deaf child, looking into learning sign language, you know, learning sign language, I wouldn't change it. Like, I wouldn't make him hear if I could, because it's a really beautiful language. It suits me very well. It's very, like, physical. You're moving. It's very expressive. It's very sincere. Like, it's very hard to be
There's no
sarcastic in sign language.
There's no sarcasm?
No.
I don't know. He was doing some pretty hardcore trash talking yesterday. Calling me what did he say?
You're a baby.
I'm a baby. I'm a snake. I'm dead. That was my favorite one. Yeah. He's a good trash talker. I don't know about the sarcasm.
Did you guys have to take classes? Like, how did you guys go about learning to sign?
YouTube is a great resource, and they have a lot of good apps.
There's really good apps.
And as soon as they found out he was deaf, we were funneled into the like Oregon Early Education Intervention, and were assigned a deaf teacher. And so she would come to the house once a week, and she'd have like little things prepared. But mostly, I think it was just our determination to learn sign language. And the sad part is, you know, the people in the early education intervention team, like, they tend to like fawn over us, which is weird, because you're like, hang on, I thought I was going to be a perfect parent. Obviously, I'm doing like 90% of this wrong. Why do you think I'm so great? And then you realize why, and it's because, you know, 90% of deaf children that are born into hearing families. So, meaning they're born into a family where everybody can hear, and they're the only deaf person. Out of those families, 7% of those families learn how to communicate with their children.
You're kidding.
No.
7.
So that's a very...
Why would that be?
I think people get stuck in that like first instinct that I had, where I was like, oh my God, what does this mean? And they find it to be so overwhelming that they like they can't get over the fear of failure in a way to really learn. I don't know. Like, to be honest with you, I don't know, because I could never imagine a scenario in which I would not want to be completely connected to my child
and to
all the time.
communicate to your child. How else would you boss them around?
You don't. They wind up going to school, basically, and they live in dorms, and they create new family connections with other deaf people. And
I had no idea about any of that.
Yeah, and so...
Which I guess would be a better place for that particular child to be if their home environment doesn't have a desire to connect.
Every state in America has one deaf school at least that's paid for by the state, and most of them are dormitories, K through 12. And so back in the day, you would just send your kid to that school, and they would live there.
Oh yeah, I remember there one being in Vancouver, driving by it.
There is one in Vancouver. That's the one for Washington, and the one in Oregon is in Salem.
But so, you know, they were watching these kids basically where they have no language development at all, you know, for the first few years, which is one of the reasons why they test for it now, and they basically funnel you into this emergency system. Because if the families aren't paying attention to what's happening to the kids, if nobody's advocating for them or trying to communicate with them, I mean, that's a really important part of the brain development of a child.
Yeah.
And then they kind of have their own culture. And so one of the things that really scared me at first was losing my kid to some other culture. Like he'd be taken away from me and kind of sucked into like this other world where I didn't belong. Because that's kind of common. And so even when we were talking about giving him cochlear implants, we got a lot of like two sides to it, where some people are like, yeah, you give him the cochlear implants, but within the deaf culture, there'd been a lot of pushback against it because they don't look at being deaf as a disability.
Right.
They have their own language, their own culture, and so they are concerned with losing their language and culture.
Interesting.
By sort of, you know, integrating deaf kids into what they want to call mainstreaming. Basically, you do the surgery and then you pop them into normal society as if nothing's different.
Crazy at first, but if you read a history of deaf people in the United States, it makes a lot more sense. So when I first found out he was deaf, I read a lot of books about it, and the best one, and the one I recommend everybody that's interested on the subject, was written by Oliver Sacks, the neurosurgeon, called Seeing Voices.
Yeah.
And it goes through the historical reasons why they feel that way. And you'll understand their point of view a lot more after you hear how awful it was for them, what they used to do to them and make them sit on their hands and prevent them from doing sign language.
They weren't allowed to sign.
Not able to sign. So that's a good book to understand that part. You know, he also talked about how people don't realize how connected, because we don't need to, because it's innate to most of us, but how connected languages to thinking. So deaf kids that aren't diagnosed early will, certain concepts like, for example, metaphor and even the concept of time can be beyond their capability at a certain age.
Right.
Forever beyond their capability at a certain age. So in Oliver Sacks' opinion was, if you don't catch them early, if you're not going to educate them early, he thought it would be better to be blind because you would still be able to communicate and have that level of education. That's a problem you can overcome as long as you have communication. But the key is communication, so you have to start very early on. So that just, to me, it was just obvious to me and Salome that the main thing we have to do is just be able to make sure that we always communicate with them.
And so, you know, it's fine for me because, like you said, I only ever really wanted to have kids, and I love being with kids. I love communicating with kids. They're straightforward, not a lot of sarcasm going on. So it's not...
You haven't met our kids.
I was going to say, unless you're in the cutthroat home of the Davisons.
Well, when they're little. I remember I used to work with kids, and there was that, like, 5 to 6 where you could still get them to do stuff based off of kind of manipulating them in the right direction, and then they got to, like, the 7, 8, 9, and all of a sudden it was just back talk all the way.
Right.
I was like, ooh.
That's why I only teach jiu-jitsu to the 5, 6, and 7-year-olds.
It's a good call.
I'm always taller. I'm always smarter.
Yeah, so I don't mind that, being connected with them like that. And we got him into a preschool for deaf kids. And I had to work really hard to get him in there because there's a lot of resistance to it. They kind of want to just have them have the surgery and then go into the regular school system. And, you know, and part of that is they want them to get that language feedback. But the reality of it is that they can't really learn what they're being taught by their teacher while at the same time having to learn with a different environment and all this extra stimuli. They need like a signer to be there with them. They need both. Yes, they need both. And especially the only reason we sent him to preschool at all was because in our house he was like the youngest by 5 years. He was the baby boy. He was deaf. And he basically had the whole household wrapped around his needs. And it got to a point where it's like, this is not how it's going to work in the real world. And you have to learn, you know, how to communicate with people that don't adore you.
And I wanted him to see other kids that had implants.
Yes. Yeah. Do the other kids in that preschool take their ears off the way he does?
Yeah, but their teachers are all there. They all sign. They all speak. They focus on both aspects of it. It's not like you will see in that book that he's talking about the history of it, where they were basically sent to schools where they were banned from using sign language and they had to learn how to speak. And that was before they even had cochlear implants. So they would just be lip reading and like trying to make the right, you know,
vocal
vibrations.
sounds. Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's like, imagine the frustration going into that.
Having all these
do the
thoughts.
implants work? Like, does he hear, like...
When he has his ears on, so it's not 24/7. It's like having a pair of glasses. With the glasses you can see, without the glasses you're completely blind.
So, but his hearing with the implants in would be...
Theoretically, it should be normal, but of course we have no way of knowing. So the only way to know is to talk to people who had hearing previously and lost it and then got implants. And you'll get mixed reviews. Some people say it sounds kind of robotic. Some people say certain tones of music don't come out quite well. Other people have said it sounded the same. So, you know, I don't think we'll ever know how it sounds to Archie. He has no idea because he's never heard before.
Right.
But
Right.
It has a lot to do with your neuroplasticity, because it's just how your brain winds up rewiring those connections. And I suspect that over a period of time, the sound gets progressively better as your mind learns how to kind of wire it. He left his own devices, would have preferred to be in a silent world, which I don't blame him for, and oftentimes I envy his capacity, just like knock him off. I'd like to be able to just knock my ears off. But the reality of it is that the rest of the world doesn't function on sign language. And so for him to be really successful and get a good education and to get the best of both worlds, we want him to have both. But we didn't want to force it on him as a baby.
Right.
We didn't want it to become a negative association to listen. So we try and put him on, and, you know, you could kind of tell now when you see him, I put him on, he kind of balls up and buries his head for a little while, and it takes him a while to...
It's his rock impersonation.
Yeah. And it's his way of kind of adjusting. And when you think about it, if you are in like a perfectly silent universe all the time and it's nice and peaceful, and then all of a sudden sound just gets imported into your brain, it's like overwhelming. And so we wanted him to go to deaf preschool so that he would see other kids that were doing the same thing as him, and so that he would learn to see the value in listening, in taking in that input from around the world, or the world around him.
Now, Una also went to that preschool, correct?
She went as a hearing peer. So when we first found out he was deaf, when we got assigned our deaf teacher, she told us about this preschool program, and that they, the best way for kids to learn is from their peers. That is in a good supervised environment. And so she went there as a hearing peer, so that she basically, she was there so that she would talk and engage and, be with other deaf kids, and that she would help them develop their language skills. And for our family's sake, so that she would develop, good signing skills. But then when it came Archie's turn to go, they didn't really want to send him there. They were like, why isn't he mainstreaming? Why doesn't he go to a regular preschool? I'm like, well, because he's not a regular kid. And we already homeschool our kids. There was never, like, the wanting him to go to a preschool never had anything to do with wanting him to be away from us or getting time away from him. It was solely for the purposes that he needed that input that he was not getting at home. And I had to do a few like interviews, and I really had to like argue the case for why he should be allowed to go to this deaf preschool as a deaf kid, which was ridiculous.
Typical government irony of they have a school for deaf kids, but their number one job of their administrators, of which there's always a lot more than the teachers, and they're all making six figures, is to make sure nobody gets into that school, right?
Nobody even really knows the school's there. Like one of the things when we requested that he go there was like, how do they even know that it exists? What?
Your tax dollars at work, people.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, we're running on time. Ooh.
Okay.
Which means we got to get to the questions.
Oh yeah. Questions.
We have.
I don't know. I want to say one thing,
Please.
just for some of the people that are going to be watching this podcast, because sometimes I talk about this issue and then it can sound like I'm coming down real hard on teachers, and I don't mean to say that. We have a lot of good school teachers like Kane and Robert Verdell and stuff who are in the organization who I respect a lot. I'm a teacher.
For teachers.
I have a lot of respect for teachers. I have almost no respect for the public school system of the United States, and I think we can see over the last year that the teachers union and the good of the children are two completely unrelated things. And so I would just want to make that distinction clear, and I would say to all the good school teachers out there, I mean, they know the system's corrupt and we need to fix it.
Mm-hmm. You have money that you increase the money that goes into the school system, but it's not going to the classrooms, it's not going to the teachers. You still have good teachers with 30 kids in there and purchasing their own supplies to try and make it work.
And in their defense, you look at a place like Baltimore that has they pay more per student than I think anywhere else in the United States, and it's far more than the government's paying far more than you would for a private school, and a tiny percentage of them can even read. Mm-hmm. And again, that goes back to a lot of what we're talking about, the family structure, which is not the fault of the teachers. It's not the fault of the police officers in that environment either. That goes back to a bigger societal issue. But clearly, we can do better with our tax dollars.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I didn't get the impression that anyone's going to think we're bashing teachers. So,
yeah, just
would make sure you
asterisks in there.
And when it comes to the life of kids that don't have the good family structure, a good teacher can, make or break their success in life.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, I think we all have that one or two or hopefully a handful of teachers in our history who in our personal histories who stand out as like, that one helped me.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, you ready for the big questions?
Fire away.
Well, this is one we added. We started with 3 questions, but we've just recently added one that I like to begin with, which is, Salome, you're going to love this one. If you could pick a theme song for your life as a parent, what would it be?
Sweet. It would be probably Danny's song by now I lost his name. James Taylor.
James Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not gonna be popular with Kisa.
Yeah, you lost me at James Taylor.
No, but I remember it's either that one or the song we got married to, which is Banana Pancakes by Jack Johnson. And those 2 songs are songs that I would listen to before I ever moved here. After we'd fallen in love, and it was just like the vision that I saw for our life, which was, like in Danny's song, you have this beautiful baby boy and everything's wonderful and you can live in a paper box so long as you have each other. And that's kind of, I guess, my theme is like, so long as we're together, everything else is okay.
Help by Little River Band.
Perfect.
Okay, and then you get an opportunity to tell us a moment when you just totally blew it as a parent. Like we've all blown it lots of times, but the one that stands out in your mind where you're like, man, if I could go back and do that again, I would.
I don't have any of those. I'm amazing as a parent.
No. That was sarcasm.
Yeah.
See? I'm learning.
I remember going with Hunter to his high school on one particular occasion to talk to his high school teacher, and this was right before they kicked him out of the school. And I could tell immediately that the guy was an asshole and had been an asshole to Hunter, and I regret that I was as polite as I was to him in that moment. I think that at that case I should have stood up for him more and basically put that guy in his place, which I think I was too diplomatic. Ironic, I guess, that my failure is being nice to someone.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
I think mine is like an ongoing thing, and it's not necessarily anything that I would change, but it's something that I still have not figured out how to navigate as well as I would like to. And we were talking about this earlier, where, you know, each child comes with its own set of blank instructions. And, you know, so far we have 5 between us. We have 3 of our own, and they're all very different. And the way I like to describe it is like our eldest, Annika, to her, the word no is a dare. And she spends much more time and energy trying to not do whatever you ask her to do or tell her to do than it would ever take to do said thing. Una's like challenges that she has really big emotions. Like when she gets upset, it's really hard to calm her down. Like you just kind of have to wait it out. But other than that, me and her get along really well because we kind of have the same big emotions, but also a lot of the same kind of personality traits. And I never, ever, ever want them to feel like I favor one over the other. And so I have, like, all of the parenting books that I've read have all been because of my eldest child. And lucky for me, I got her first, so I got to, like, deal with the chaos up front, and then they got, like, you know, less chaotic. But there's a part of me that wishes that I had figured out earlier on in her life how to get her to self-motivate to do work than constantly like nagging her or trying to discipline her, because I don't want her to get all this constant negative feedback and then have that come around to her self-confidence in a way. But at the same time, it's very hard to, you know, raise them the same way when they have completely different personality types. They learn very differently. Una learns really well from like positive reinforcement. Like she wants to do good. She wants you to be happy with what she does. And with Annika, she is kind of the opposite that way, where she doesn't really care at all what you think about what she does that way. Like she's her own person, but she's unbelievably curious and she's very smart. And so after we started homeschooling and we'd done it for a few years, I realized that there was a path of less resistance with her, which was rather than trying to make her do what I wanted her to do or I thought was best for her to do, I figure out what it is that she wants to do, and then I just like put a lot of options related to that. So basically we have a huge library, or so I try to like let her guide me more. I wish I'd figured that out sooner with her. Not that I've really figured it out altogether yet, though.
Okay, and then the opposite, a moment where you felt like you did a really good job as a parent, a moment where you're like, man, I'm not bad at this at all. I'm actually pretty good at being a parent.
Where's my trophy?
You can go first.
I'll have to think about that one.
It's the reverse. Salome had to think about when she messed up, and Matt immediately jumped to the microphone.
I think where I do good as a parent is I live by the values that I want them to develop. And one of those values, which for some reason sometimes I struggle to get them to develop, is honesty. And so I'm very straightforward with them about, I mean, for example, you guys know that like my mom committed suicide and she had depression, and my parents both had problems with addiction. And so I take, you know, medication. I have consistently, but there's been time frames where when the kids were younger where I wasn't on medication and had like, you know, deep sort of pitfalls. And then there's conversations that come up, you know, for a long time when the kids would ask why my mom wasn't present or how she died, at first I told them that, she died from sadness. And then as they would watch me have kind of hard times and struggle, they started to become concerned that, are you going to die from sadness? And so I am very straightforward, and I explain to them, like, we don't drink for this reason. I take medication for this reason. Like, I'm all about what they like to call neurodiversity. I'm much less so about the labels that you put on them, because there's so much overlap in those spectrums in a way. And instead trying to teach them that it doesn't really matter so long as you learn how to live a productive and full life that way. And that just means, like, you have to understand where your skills and strong points are and where the things that you need to look out for are. And, so I think that because I am really straightforward and honest with them that way, that allows them, to trust me. And hopefully, as they get more and deeper into these teenage years, they will continue to come back and, do the same.
That's good. I can't think of a particular incident, so I'll nominate Liam. I think Liam's turned out well. So sometimes I look at him and how he handles situations, and I think, hey, done a pretty good job.
And then the last one is always just a gold nugget. Like, if there was one thing that was told to you, or one thing that you read, or a piece of advice that came from anywhere that was profound for you and had a positive impact, or maybe it's just something you discovered on your own during the the process of parenting that you would have liked to have gotten yourself earlier, that you could give to a parent. Like, what would that one piece of advice be?
Homeschool. I would have never sent my kids to public school system. From day one, I would have homeschooled.
It's a lot scarier up front than it is in reality. I was so afraid of failing them that way and not giving them the education they deserved.
It's such a low bar. You're not going to fail these kids.
And then I realized, they're like years and years ahead of most of their peers.
You're going to be 3 years ahead in no time from what they're going to be doing there. So
yeah, like I said, homeschooling is actually quite common in Kalispell, believe it or not, even though we do have good schools.
I believe it, yeah.
And we did contemplate it.
But I think...
and then the kids woke up and I was like, never mind. Let's get you out the door.
It's always funny when our friend, we have a mutual friend who, she would always talk about how hard it was to have to do school drop-offs and all these things, and we're so lucky that we don't have to deal with all the school system. But then when it comes time for like summer break or something and the kids are home all day long, and then everybody's like, oh my God, when's school going to start up again? Like, I don't notice the difference. But to answer that question,
your gold nugget?
My golden nugget was what Travis and I were arguing about at dinner the other day, is attachment.
Arguing, air quotes.
Yeah, negotiating.
Discussing.
Discussing. Is it, for me, like I said again, attachment parenting is something that I value, and that doesn't mean that I don't like try and create a sleep schedule for my kids. It means that I was really lucky in the sense that I had a grandma that I was really close to, and that I always felt unconditional love from, got a lot of physical affection from, and just generally felt safe with. Like, I had a home to return to. And my parents had me when they were kind of young, and my mom used to tell me, like, when I was little, that I had chosen my grandmother, like that I had rejected her and chosen my grandmother. And when I was pregnant with Annika, I was unbelievably petrified that she was going to turn around and like pick somebody else instead of me. And I was just like, ugh. But I realized, like, later on as I was working through my issues, that part of that is like called an attachment disorder, where, and that's what I was sort of talking about with those Russian orphans, yeah. And so that's like my golden nugget, is I think that a well-attached child is confident in sort of leaving home base to go start exploring the world. And, you know, and this is going to sound really cheesy, but no matter the question, love is the answer.
There's a good one. Thanks,
a wrap?
guys. That's a wrap.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us today. If you want more information about the Growing Gorillas martial arts program for kids, please visit growinggorillas.com.
And if you're interested in finding an SBG near you in the state of Montana, please visit us at sbgmontana.com.
See you soon.
Stay gold, Pony Boy.
Peace out, Girl Scout.
Catch you on the flip-flop.
Get you on the flipper dipper.
After a while, crocodile.
I don't know anymore.
See you later, alligator.